Welcome to Bible study. This is the Bible study we're preparing for the fourth Sunday in Advent, December 18th in 2022. And we are looking at John chapter 7 together. So if you have your Bible available to you, please turn to that and let's look a little bit here. This section, John chapters 7 and 8, will bridge really between this long discourse of Jesus, the bread of life, up to the next discourse, which is Jesus, the light of the world. So we're going to be transitioning between these two meta themes that run through the gospel of bread, the source, the sustenance of life, and light, which is, if you think about it, a different metaphor, a different picture to understand Jesus. It's a metaphor of understanding. And these two things aren't exclusive of each other. They're going to work together. But we're going to be moving into a new way or a new metaphor for how we talk about this Jesus in the gospel according to John. But along the way, we're going to learn some very interesting things and hear Jesus assert some very strong and important things about himself. This passage is, again, one of these that doesn't show up quite very often in the study, in people's popular study of John. I mean, we're very familiar with Jesus feeding the multitudes. We're very familiar with Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. And then in the latter part, I am the light of the world. But this middle transitional piece is a little dense, a little, it's a little harder to get your head around and to hear exactly what he's saying. So you'll want to kind of pay attention closely to what you're reading here and try and remember to connect to earlier things. One of the things you have to remember as you read this is that this is only now a couple chapters removed from this miracle Jesus did, this sign Jesus did back at the beginning of chapter 5. The last time he was in Jerusalem, he had healed this man at the pool of Bethsaida, and it had been done on a Sabbath. And as a result, Jesus got into hot water with the Jewish authorities. This is now going to resume as Jesus returns to Jerusalem in this story. But first, we got to get him there because he has gone up into Galilee. That's where the feeding of the 5,000 takes place. That's where walking on the water. That's where all of the discourse of the bread of life takes place, is in Capernaum. Well, now he's got to come back down to Jerusalem. And so that's where we start with this. And we have this interchange he has with his brothers. Who are these? Is this James and Judas and Simon, the people that are named as his brothers elsewhere? Probably. But so the other children of Mary and Joseph? Quite likely. Or does John mean something else? He doesn't really tell us. But he calls them brothers. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He did not wish to go about in Judea because the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. He had raised enough hostility there that they were ready to do him in. Now, the Jewish festival of booths was near. Remember, back in the end of chapter 5, and as we explored in chapter 6, Jesus has been claiming that Moses is talking about him. Now we're talking about another festival. This is not one we're as familiar with as the Passover festival. The Feast of Booths is still observed by Jewish communities to this day. If you live in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, all of a sudden at some point during the year, you'll notice like tents set up in people's backyard. This festival is outlined in the Torah, and it says that every so often they should erect a tent and remember their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, when they ate the manna, when they drank water from the rock, when they were totally dependent on God. And this was one of the major festivals of the Jewish religion and the people of Jesus' day, and to this day. Jewish people take this very seriously, and you'll see them still do this. And so it's the Feast of Booths, remembering the Exodus, particularly manna and water from the rock. So his brothers say, well, why don't you go down and leave here, go to Judea, so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. So his brothers seem to say, why don't you go to Judea and get onto the bigger stage? Go down, let them see what you're doing, because his brothers are seeing him do these miraculous signs. For no one wants to be widely known acts in secret. You know, if you want fame, you better go for it, say his brothers. But then John gives this little thing. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. But then there's this parenthesis in chapter 5. I mean, that's how our editors put it in our Bibles. And it's probably a good way to do it. For not even his brothers believed in him. This is John really wrestling with this tension between signs and reality. The miracles that he's doing are not the thing. Jesus is the thing. The miracles point to him. The signs are referencing him. They're not him. He hasn't come to set up the ultimate in healthcare systems. He hasn't come to be the solution to the world hunger problem. He has come to solve the much bigger, deeper problems of which hunger and sickness and all of the other problems of this world are symptoms. He has come to deal with the sin problem. Because remember, that's what John pointed to him and said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Part of Jesus' struggle was, remember, and after the feeding of the multitudes, he disappeared into the hills because the people wanted to make him a king. They wanted to solve the hunger problem, and they figured Jesus was the solution to the hunger problem. But they weren't really asking about the real problem. And so his brothers seemed to be in that crowd too. Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. You can do whatever you want. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify against it that its works are evil. Go to the festival yourselves. I am not going to this festival, for my time is not yet fully come." And after saying this, he remained in Galilee. So his brothers want him to go down and observe the festival, which is really required of people who are able to get there. And Jesus says, "I'm not going to go, and my time is not yet come." Time, he means arriving at the festival and probably dying on the cross. That's his time. And that's going to happen at Passover, not at Festival of Booths. But Jesus says, "You guys go. You guys go ahead and participate." But then, after his brothers leave, he also went. Not publicly, but as it were in secret. So Jesus doesn't do a grand entrance into Jerusalem like he does on Palm Sunday. Jesus instead slips into town. And as we're going to notice, will suddenly show up in the temple teaching. The Jews were looking for him at the festival, saying, "Where is he?" So they're all looking. And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds, while some were saying, "He's a good man." Others were saying, "No, he is deceiving the crowd." Yet no one would speak openly about him for fear of the Jewish authorities. And so you've got this. So John's painting this scene for us of people riding on the fence. And a split decision about this Jesus. Is it going to go this way or is it going to go that way? He's a good man, say some. No, he's a charlatan, say others. But they couldn't surface the conversation because the authorities had already made up their mind. About the middle of the festival, these festivals took several days, Jesus went up to the temple and began to teach. The Jews were astonished at it, saying, "How does this man have such learning when he has never been taught?" He's not been a disciple of one of the great rabbis of the time, not a Gamaliel or a Hillel or one of these other men who are steeped in the Torah and who have memorized the whole thing. And they are these schools of thought about how to read and interpret the Torah, or are contending with one another. Jesus has never been a part of that. He is autodidact is the word we might say today, but he's never gone to school. He hasn't got a bachelor's degree in theology, not a master's degree, certainly not a PhD in theology. But let's admit it, from our perspective, we know, and John knows, and his audience knows, Jesus doesn't need the accreditation of any school. He is theology. He is the subject of theology. Theology is about him. And so, of course, he knows it. I mean, he's the one who is behind the Torah. He's not merely an interpreter standing in front of it like the rest of us, pointing out different passages and saying, oh, look, see what it says? No, he is the one who says it. Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but is his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own." And so now we have this kind of circular authentication piece. If you do the will of God, you'll be able to discern that Jesus is from God. If you don't do the will of God, then you must not be doing, then you won't be able to tell Jesus. Well, you can run the logic the other way. If you can't identify Jesus, if you don't recognize him, that must mean you're not doing the will of God. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true. That one is legitimate. That one is not speaking out of self-interest. There is nothing false in him. Did not Moses give you the law, yet none of you keeps it? Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? Remember, this is going back to when he healed this man on the Sabbath. He had told him, get up, take up your mat, and go home. You shouldn't carry a mat on the Sabbath. Why are you trying to kill me? The crowd answered him. He said, "Are you nuts? You have a demon? Are you crazy? Who is trying to kill you?" Jesus said, "Well, I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. Moses gave you circumcision, and on the 8th day, you're supposed to be circumcised. Well, what happens when that 8th day falls on a Sabbath? You circumcise." It is, of course, not from Moses, but it comes actually from Abraham, he says. It's from the patriarchs. You circumcise a man on the Sabbath day, if that's the right day. If it's the 8th day, that's the day you do it. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? You're willing to do this thing that affects, this one little part on the Sabbath because the Torah calls for it. But the Torah also calls for the care of the whole person. And here I cared for this whole man. I healed his whole body on the Sabbath. And you're calling me a lawbreaker. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Jesus seems to be saying that the edifice of first century Judaism has kind of gotten so ossified, so focused on the particulars, it can't see the big picture. It can't see what the Torah is really pushing people toward. And that, of course, is justice and mercy and love. Now, some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, "Isn't this the guy they were trying to kill? And here he is speaking openly, but they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Messiah?" And so now the question changes a little bit, that the religious authorities, they got to do something. Because now their inaction is being interpreted as approval of the Christ. Yet we know where this man is from, but when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. Now we know this guy comes from Nazareth. He comes from Galilee. The Messiah surely is going to come out of nowhere, right? He's going to sort of just appear on the scene. But do they really know where Jesus is from? And this is going to be one of the questions. Is Jesus really from Nazareth? Or was that simply his way station before he showed up in Jerusalem to be the Messiah there? Because the point that John says you know, and that he knows as readers, is that Jesus is not really from Nazareth. That was not his beginning, nor Bethlehem for that matter. He's from eternity. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, by him all things were made, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Where is Jesus from? He's not from Nazareth in Galilee. These people think he is. They can't imagine that that's not where he's from. So Jesus cried out as he was teaching in the temple. You can just almost hear Jesus getting frustrated. You know me and you know where I am from, do you? I have not come on my own, but the one who sent me is true, and you do not know him. So back to that, if you were doing the works of the Father, you would recognize me, but you're not. The prophets, the Torah have called you to be people of mercy and grace and justice and peace, but that's not what you're doing. I know him. I know the one who sent me, because I am from him, and he sent me. So they're starting to pick up, oh, he's claiming to be not from Nazareth, even though that's where his family lives. He's claiming to be from God. Now that they're going, oh, they're starting to see kind of what he's saying here. Then they tried to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. Yet many in the crowd believed. They faithed in him. And they were saying, when the Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this guy has done? This first half of the 7th chapter of John really forces us to now ask this question of what do we actually say about this Jesus? For John's first century audience who were saying that they were happy to say Jesus is from God. They were less happy to say that he was actually human. And you can see the Jewish people, and John's going to use this tension there to really say you got to have it both ways. You've got to have him from God, but you also have to have him from Nazareth. The Jewish people are the ones who are on the scene. They are the eyewitnesses of this. They are going to tell you, no, he's from Nazareth. We know his parents. We remember him as a little boy running around in the streets of Nazareth. No, we know he's from Nazareth. And they're going to struggle with saying he is from God. John's late first century audience, the people that he's intending this book to be read by, they weren't there. And so they don't see the humanity of Jesus. They listen to what he says. They perhaps acknowledge his miraculous signs, and they say he is from God. But they can't see his humanity. And so John is going to really lay this chapter out and say the struggle that the first century people had to see the love, to see the humanity of Jesus and the divinity, means that now in the late first century, when we see the divinity, but maybe not the humanity, that's a struggle for either way of us, either side of it. And that we as 21st century Christians continue to have this struggle to say that he is fully man and he is fully God. and what exactly that means. You will find that most of the time when people's Christianity goes off the rails, they have compromised one or the other in order to make sense of this in their heads. And John is saying you have to have them both. He's from Nazareth. He was a little boy. He grew up. He has parents and brothers. Notice their presence at the beginning of this story. But he's also from God. And so the question that these people asked, they said, when the Messiah comes, is he going to do more signs than this guy has done? I mean, come on. What he's doing is bearing witness to him. It is a sign, and if we see the sign, it's pointing to his messiahship. He's pointing to him as the one whom God sends. But we know he's from Nazareth. How can that be? We'll wrestle a little bit with this together on Sunday if you come to the Bible study. Otherwise, shoot me an email if you got a question about this. Let's talk some more. God bless you. Bye-bye.